When we work in that sort of seeking self-improvement paradigm, instead of delivering us from self-deficiency, it reinforces self-deficiency. The idea here is noticing, like, what are the impediments to unfoldment? What are the impediments to this natural pulsation of life? And how can we actually restore that pulsation? It seems that AI has not just become this next technology race, it's an arms race. People are starting to realize that the promise of self-improvement or the promise of improving society or
Right.
whatever improvement you're looking at, it's really not being delivered.
On the show today, a really excellent coach, someone who I think started off in software engineer, but a long, long time ago. Apparently, we met at a coaching course, I think about 20 years ago, out on the West Coast doing some somatic work. He then became one of the faculty for New Ventures West, who are really well thought of in the coaching world. They're definitely one of the better coaching organizations out there. And has since founded his Aletheia Coaching, which looks at coaching at different levels. And I think is in my opinion, one of the most sophisticated models of coaching I've come across. So I'm very much here as a sort of learner as well as someone to interview today. So, Steve March, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Yeah, it's lovely to reconnect after 20 years. I
It's
remember
been a
uh,
while.
I remember connecting with you way back
I,
when. So
you know what? I won't ask what I was like then because it's probably better we get into the topic. So, I was thinking
sounds good.
maybe later. I was thinking as a starting point. I found that everything and nothing works, right? On the one hand, there's so much good stuff out there. Somatics work, part work, nervous system work,
Yeah.
Buddhism, meditation. And on the other hand, sometimes things just don't touch clients or even for myself, I do all this work and I find myself on the couch doom scrolling or whatever it is. So it's sort of like everything works and nothing works. What's your take on that?
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's kind of what I picked up back in those days when we crossed paths. I was kind of in the midst of doing every single training I could. I took, 10 years and learned many different coaching methods and psychotherapy methods and somatic methods and you name it. I was in it. And you know, all of these different methods were so different from each other. And that initially surprised me because I thought we're all working with human beings. We just have variations on a theme, right? And that's not at all what I found. And what I noticed was that we have this vast diversity of approaches and they all work. What explains that? But then I also noticed they all don't work sometimes too. And what explains that? And you have to have a way of explaining both of those things at the same time. And I started to sit with that question, and I sat with that question for a couple years. And then around 2010 or so, I had a big integrating insight, which is that they all work at different depths. And when a client is tuned into themselves or the world or others at a particular depth, meeting them with a method that sees the world in that way is really skillful, really, really works. But if you try to meet them with a method that sees the world at a different depth, then there's a kind of cumbersome to the conversation. It doesn't really meet them where they are, which is kind of one of the mantras in the coaching world is always meet the client where they are.
Yeah.
And so I started to see it in that kind of way, and that really started to open up the possibility of what if we had like a way of coaching that understood depth as a primary distinction, and then we learned to dial into the depth that the client was currently experiencing themselves at. And that's eventually what became Aletheia Coaching.
Nice. That intuitively makes sense. When you say depth, what do you mean? It's one of those words that people will say, oh, they went deep in a session. Often they mean they sort of cried or something, right? I mean, I'm guessing you have a more rigorous definition of it.
Well, yeah, I can look at it from a rigorous perspective, but I think just, kind of like an experiential perspective. A lot of people will have experiences of meditation, and if you're meditating in a skillful way, what you'll find is that you drop from a kind of everyday awareness, which I would call like the depth of parts, and you drop into a more kind of fluid, flowing kind of awareness, which I would call the depth of process, and then into a depth of wholeness, innate wholeness, dropping into a sense of enoughness, which is really the antidote to a lot of self-deficiency and uh, lack of self-worth and lack of self-esteem and lack of self-confidence and things like that. And then even deeper into a more foundational depth. These last two depths I call the depth of presence and absence and the depth of non-dual presence. And so there's a sense that actually what's possible is deepening contact with ourselves in this way, but it's not just with ourselves, it's really with everything. So you can
Hmm.
deepen contact with another person, you can deepen contact with the physical, natural world. And so, and each depth is kind of, and here's the rigorous technological term, ontologically prior to the depths that are above it. So what that means is that these depths exist, they are prior to the unfolding of depth. So as we come into the world, we come in at the deepest depth, and through ego formation, we kind of unfold um, into an ego that views the world as everything is separate. I'm separate from you. And that sense of separation, which is our everyday experience, is actually also the source of a lot of suffering, the source of a lot of feeling isolated, feeling alone, feeling criticized, comparing ourselves to each other, and so on and so forth. A lot of the issues that we work with as coaches. So, in some sense, and I'm really painting broad brushstrokes here, the antidote to that, the antidote to a lot of what ails us, is actually learning to recover the depth that we are and inhabit all of our depth, the whole way from the depth of parts to the depth of non-duality, which is really kind of an embrace of being everything that we are. And when we can do that, then there is a sense of innate resourcefulness and creativity flows, and there's access to self-arising wisdom, and it's easier to navigate the complexity of life when we feel resourced in that kind of way.
Mm. Okay, let's flesh this out maybe with an example. So, I don't know, tech guy comes to you, super stressed, arguing with his boss, wants a promotion, kind of classic coaching client, you know?
Yeah.
How does this might sound sort of quite highfalutin and spiritual, but I know you're a practical guy as well. It's one of the reasons I've really sort of enjoyed listening to you in the past. Yeah, tell us a little bit about those levels and how they might apply to John at Globocore.
Well, the first thing I would say is that I really don't talk in this kind of language to coaching clients. I can and eventually do introduce some of it, but at first, essentially what I'm doing is just listening to a client, um, understanding more what their goal is, what they're interested in, what kind of direction they're wanting to move in life. And then the next question is, what's impeding you? What are the impediments to that? And instead of trying to put energy behind helping to the client to move more in that direction, what I'm really doing is I'm reducing the inner impediments, which they often are. Like maybe this person wants to get a promotion, but taking the kind of actions that they need to take at work to do projects feels risky to them, and they have a risk aversion part of themselves. And so that risk aversion part of themselves is acting as an impediment to being able to do the kinds of things that maybe they even know how to do or know that they need to do in order to be seen by others and be valued by others and get a promotion. So, what are those impediments? So, I'm listening for those impediments. And my job as a coach is to help the client to reduce those impediments or maybe eliminate them so that their natural um, sort of drives and natural motivations and the skillfulness that they already have can actually move them more in that direction so it's less impeded. And so, how I do that is basically through unfoldment, which is what I call my work overall, as opposed to some kind of self-improvement. So,
Yeah.
we're really working to unfold that, work with parts and deepen down.
I really like this word unfoldment. Sometimes I feel like we're kind of more doing personal growth and we're kind of imposing something, and that doesn't seem to land very deeply or last very long. And then other times, the sort of you don't have to pull on the grass to make it grow, or you look at a baby, it
Right.
just becomes an adult as long as you sort of feed it and don't, run it over with a car or something.
Exactly.
Like most of our growth is this unfoldment, and in embodiment work, there's this sort of practice paradigm of we do and we develop a skill through practice. And that's great. That's great. We use that. But I increasingly feel like this unfolding element is the bigger part of personal growth. What's your thoughts on that?
Exactly. I think a lot of I talk about two different paradigms in my work, the seeking self-improvement paradigm, in the unfoldment paradigm, I think the one that prevails in our culture is seeking self-improvement. I mean, if I look at my YouTube feed, maybe it's because I'm a coach and I look at this kind of stuff, but it's just filled with videos about self-improvement. And we're constantly marketed that, which basically means we're constantly marketed self-deficiency. And our whole economy is based upon that. If I can sell you that you're deficient in something, I can sell you the solution to that. And you know, I think that I was originally trained as a developmental coach, and I think that even development, adult development has been sort of billed as the new and improved way of improving yourself. And what I noticed after many years of practicing that and even teaching that is that when we work in that sort of seeking self-improvement paradigm, instead of delivering us from self-deficiency, it reinforces self-deficiency. And it does that, of course, if we set out on a new self-improvement project and we stumble, we're going to feel like I don't have what it takes. But mostly we don't stumble, we get like mixed results. It sort of works, but it sort of doesn't work. But we still feel like I don't have what it takes. And then that promotes us to feeling like, well, maybe what I need is a new way of improving, an improved way of improving. And we get caught in the self-improvement trap. But ironically, even when we succeed with our self-improvement projects, that kind of we usually succeed because we've really, with discipline, focused on something like maybe losing weight or reorganizing some part of our life. And then that success casts this huge shadow on the rest of life. And we say, like, look at all the other places I'm deficient and in need of self-improvement. So unfoldment is kind of the antidote to that. Unfoldment starts with the premise that who we are is already whole. Just like that little baby. You don't look at the little baby and think like, what a pathetic human being. They can't do anything. They can't feed themselves. They can't earn a paycheck. You just look at a little baby like a miracle. And you hold the little baby, you love the little baby. And what you're doing is you're creating a kind of relational space in which the baby ideally thrives and just simply unfolds or grows up. So unfoldment is always an unfoldment of innate wholeness um, towards another expression of wholeness. And that's the distinction. So instead of being deficient and trying to remedy that, we're whole and whole and whole the whole way along. And that's really the new distinction. I say new, I think it's really the primordial distinction. It's the way that all of us have transformed and grown forever. But we've forgotten about this in our culture, and with some kind of hubris, we feel like we can take over and do better in
Hmm.
some sense. And a lot of what I'm advocating is kind of it's new, but it's really a return to the way nature works, the way organic life actually lives. That's really what this approach is about.
Nice. What would you say would be your sort of key insights or key kind of aspects of this approach then? So unfoldment, love it. That sounds like one. I'm guessing there's a few more.
Key insights. One of them,
Perspectives or yeah.
yeah, one of them is that I talked about these four depths sort of briefly, and experience kind of surfaces through the depths and then deepens down through the depths. And there's this kind of sort of pulsation of life. And so earlier I talked about like noticing impediments and working to reduce impediments. And so the idea here is noticing like what are the impediments to unfoldment? What are the impediments to this natural pulsation of life? And how can we actually restore that pulsation? And so a big discovery here is that everything that surfaces comes with a need for contact. So here comes a sensation, here comes a felt sense, here comes an emotion, a thought. Something is coming up, an image. And what we want to be able to do, and our practice is really aimed at this, is fulfilling the need for contact for whatever that is. And so rather than trying to change what that is, we're just simply allowing it to be exactly as it is to help the client embody that more fully. And so that it can be felt, it can be met, it can be contacted. And then when that happens, there's a spontaneous release, a kind of melting, and then a deepening into wholeness. And so the big irony in the midst of this is that this is a powerful relational atmosphere for change and transformation. But what we do inside of those relationships is we try not to change primary experience at all, instead to just embody and feel it and allow the change to spontaneously unfold.
Great. I mean, I definitely want to ask about the role of embodied coaching here and just sort of because we haven't talked in 20 years. I'm not a complete fundamentalist when it comes to embodiment coaching. I think there's lots of good stuff out there. I do other
Of
courses
course, yeah.
myself. So I'm more kind of keen to feel like, okay, what's the place of embodied coaching? Is there embodiment at all these four levels? Is it that there's a particular, because I see some clients have phenomenal results with it and others sort of shrug and they need to go off and do trauma therapy or something else, right?
Right.
Just to be honest. So yeah, what's the role of embodied coaching in this model?
Yeah, so the first thing is that you have to understand the body at the four depths. So the view of the body differs at each of the depths. Like a view at the depth of parts is very much a view of body parts. It's very physical, kind of the gross body. Um, this is the body that we feel like separates us from the world and from other people. When we drop into the depth of process, this is the experiential body. This is the felt body. This is the body of felt sense, in the Gendlin sense of it. This is the body of felt image, which is it's the imaginal body. And so we drop in and we might sense maybe a stirring in our belly, or maybe we feel something in our chest, like our heart is blossoming or something. These feelings are real and palpable, but they don't really necessarily correspond to our physical organs or something. If you feel something opening in your heart, your chest is still intact. So that's a different view. And then if we go even deeper, we have the body of presence. So at this depth of presence and absence, there are many, many different qualities of presence, like trust and peacefulness and joy and love and compassion and will qualities and passion. Um, Many different qualities of presence. And what we can realize is that each of those has a particular body to it. And so when we actually feel ourselves as strength or as compassion, it feels like we're sensing something about ourselves as intimate as sensing our own body, because we feel strength in our body. We feel compassion in our body. We feel joy. We feel love in our body. And then even deeper, and this gets quite esoteric, at the depth of non-dual presence, there's sort of two approaches. One is that at that depth, we transcend the body mind. Another approach is that we develop something that's called the diamond body. And the diamond body is in deep non-dual practice. There's many stages to it, and that's quite a topic unto itself to open up. But just really briefly, as we drop into the depth of non-dual presence, there's a way that we can actually embody non-dual presence. And in the embodiment of non-dual presence, we occupy consciously all four depths at the same time. And so it's a kind of body that allows us to fully be this embrace of all of our depth, of all of ourselves, of everything. So that's the first thing, is you really have to look at the body in terms of depth. Um, and then how do you work with each of those depths when the client is attuned to that? That's a whole other uh, topic.
When you say depth, you're talking about state essentially, or something else.
You could look at it as a state in terms of the way that we attune to it, but the depths, the way I would invite you to look at the depths is almost environmental as something that you inhabit. So just like we're inhabiting the physical world, it's possible to inhabit the depth of process. In fact, you could even start to notice the physical world both from the depth of parts, in which you look around and you see everything as separate, identifiable, nameable. But then you can take the view, almost like a very Taoist kind of view, where you see the same world, but instead you look at it in as a flow. you look at it as a process, as if everything is impermanent, everything is flowing. Some things are flowing so slowly, you're sure they're not flowing. Some things are flowing very quickly, leaves blowing in the wind, motions flowing through the body, sensations flickering through the body. So essentially, these depths are not just internal states, they're actually here in the world that we inhabit. And so, just like having contact with the world, we want to have contact with ourselves, and that's possible at these different depths.
Okay. Just before you came on Zoom, there was a picture on Zoom of you doing Qigong. Is that one
Yes.
of your somatic practices that informs this work?
Yes, I've been doing Qigong for probably about 25 years.
Oh wow. And any other sort of somatic influences? I'm just being a geek and curious.
Um, I'm part of Aletheia is a kind of neo-Reiki and breath work.
Okay.
So that's a big part of it. That's one of the ways we work with the body, building charge, activating segments of emotional armoring, working with self-contact to actually melt armoring. So that's a huge influence. Um, I love tennis.
Okay. Why not? And you sent me some notes beforehand that talk about grounding, uprightness, containing, discharging, boundaries. I mean, any of these are
Mm.
big topics. Is any of those that jump out at you to sort of say the role in the embodied part of this work?
Yeah, so these are what I call somatic functions. And we have somatic functions in this cycle of surfacing of experience and deepening. What I've learned is that there are certain somatic functions that really help support that process of surfacing and deepening. So, at the depth of non-dual presence, we have groundedness and uprightness. Groundedness, contact with the earth, allowing ourselves to really relax into the earth, to be supported by the earth instead of bracing ourselves up from the earth. And then extending from that contact up so that we actually feel, again, a kind of Taoist view, earthly beings and heavenly beings at the same time. We're angels and animals. There's a sense of actually being in our full uprightness and also grounded. This really helps with accessing the deeper depths. And I often find when I'm working with clients and they spontaneously drop into these deeper depths, that you can actually attune to that because you can see their body reorganizing.
Hmm.
At the deeper depths, they'll go from, some kind of a possibly like a collapse, or maybe they're in an asymmetrical body shape. And without me saying anything, as they're sensing themselves, their body will just start to reorganize. And I often find that they'll come up into this kind of occupying their full uprightness.
Nice.
And
Yeah, there's a
and
reason we
so
meditate sitting or standing upright rather than slouched in a chair or something like that. I mean, there's
exactly
reasons
right. I
for those
mean,
postures.
the deeper I go into all of this, I used to not think that much of the meditation instructions around posture. I was much more interested about, oh, what do you do with your attention? And I thought that was the real practice. And to be honest with you, the deeper I've gone into all of this, the more I've started to appreciate that the posture itself is so integral to that practice that we're really invited to take a grounded posture, an upright posture, to take a posture that contains experience, that we're focusing on our breath, we're breathing, we're allowing some natural charge and discharge to happen. So much of that is what we're actually building up in the posture to be able to practice. So, yeah, the body is central in this.
Slight change here. It's very live for me. I was just walking around the park and I had a message from an old colleague, someone I've worked with for many years. Done a lot of in-depth somatic work. She was in Russia and then because of Putin, effectively became a refugee and
Mm,
ended up in Israel and then got bombed in Israel. And she's had quite a wild ride. And if you're out there, Vilya, love you. And we were talking, sending messages to each other on WhatsApp is often how we communicate, busy people, shared voice messages. And we said something's changed in the last few years. It's a bit of a cliche to say since COVID, but we're talking about nothing's stable, nothing's predictable. And obviously, her and my personal experience, Ukraine, Israel, places like that, then it's
right.
particularly kind of touched us perhaps. But I think for everyone in the world, there's riots in England right now. There's all sorts of
Yeah.
disturbances everywhere. I live in a sort of picture postcard of Slovenia, and I said, look, it's not here yet, but it's coming here. Like it's coming here.
Right.
And when we were sort of pondering the embodied work we'd done, the coaching work we'd both trained in, therapy in her case too, was sort of pondering, does it still work? Or has something shifted fundamentally just in the last 3 to 5 years? Really, not in quite a small space of time. We're trying to put our finger on what it is. 'Cause, we still do good coaching programs and people benefit and people learn to meditate. That's in any ways helpful. I always recommend these things. But something
Yeah.
seems to have shifted. Um, yeah, what's your take on that?
Yeah. I detect something similar as well. And one of the ways that we're adapting to this is what we've been noticing is that more and more people are coming into our coach training programs where in the beginning we start to teach how to bring attention into the body, how to work to sense what's surfacing, how to give space for that. And then quickly we move into things like parts work, which is kind of a very top-down approach. And what we've been noticing is more and more people are coming in traumatized, more and more people are coming in a state of functional freeze. And really what's needed is more nervous system, more bottom-up nervous system work first before we can even get into that sort of top-down work. And so we're right now in the process of redesigning the beginning part of our level one curriculum for exactly that, expanding it and going slower in some kind of sense, working more with activation, teaching people how to work with activation in an unfolding way, which is really just simply to hold space for it, allow it to complete, work to soften any impediments to that. Um, Being really inspired in that by somatic experiencing and different traditions like that. So I think that's definitely one of the things. I think there's also like this kind of mood that is setting in. Um, and mood shapes how everything occurs. Mood shapes how we feel
Yes.
ourselves. Mood shapes how we feel other people. Mood shapes how we entertain possibilities
Like a
about the future.
global embodied substrate that we're doing our coaching or work or whatever in, right? Like there's a vibe. The kids call it the
The
vibe shift.
vibe, right?
Of that, right?
Exactly. Yeah, there's this mood shift that is happening. I mean, it's easy to see the contrast. Like if we look at something like the mood today versus the 80s, like go, 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 a lot of entrepreneurism, the future's bright, um, that kind of mood, stark contrast to what we find today. You know,
Things
uh,
are getting worse. That's the narrative. We met in 2005, right? War of Terror, it's a sort of War of Terror, I call it, had just started. So there was some sort of, we weren't quite in the sort of 90s, but it hadn't really come home to roost yet.
yeah,
And there was still a sense of like we're in progressive modernity. Things are getting better. We're going to end up in Star Trek soon. Where's my teleporter and replicator?
right.
Everything's getting better, and we're doing personal growth, and integral theory is going to save the world. And there's all these new modalities, and isn't it fantastic? I can study this in California. I don't hear that kind of hopefulness. If you ask most people in the UK, most Western countries, they'd say if you said things are getting better or worse, my guess is 90% now would say worse. And
Yeah.
there's still some optimistic. California tends to be quite optimistic. ChatGPT is quite optimistic, but generally the mood I feel is one of sort of decay or at least stagnation.
And I think also somewhat powerlessness.
Right.
I think people see the forces that are propelling forward, and many people like have questions about AI and what we should be doing, and is our economy ready for this? And it seems that AI has not just become this next technology race; it's an arms race. And the second it
Mhm.
becomes an arms race, we're propelled forward out of tremendous fear, and there is a lot of powerlessness. I also think that there's an exhaustion that people
Yes.
have around deficiency and lack. As I was saying earlier, like this whole narrative of deficiency and lack propelling us into self-improvement and the optimism of that, the hope of that. And we've been going guns a-blazing with that, like um, a lot. And I think what's beginning to dawn is people are starting to realize that the promise of self-improvement or the promise of improving society or
Right.
whatever improvement you're looking at, it's really not being delivered. If anything, it's just we're just that sense of deficiency and lack is being reinforced. And in a way, there isn't another alternative. And so
Right.
what we do when we say this isn't working is we say, oh, we need to improve this way of improving.
Right. We
And
double down on it. Yeah.
yeah, we double down in it and we get trapped in this. And I think that's beginning to dawn on us more and more and more. So it's like, okay, well, this isn't working, but I don't, what else
What
do I
else
do?
is there? So I don't mind. We'll go into dialogue a little bit if you don't mind on this. There's this.
Please, yeah.
I'm very, I find sort of very alive in this. So it's kind of like we started to remove co-regulation from society gradually, maybe since the Industrial Revolution. We started to remove kind of eco-regulation since the Paleolithic times. We started to remove sort of the theo-regulation of kind of spirit and meaning, again, since industrialization, but particularly in the sort of cynical, kind of godless modern times. We
Hmm.
don't really have community. Obviously, America was a bit ahead of the game there in terms of multiculturalism, but certainly in Europe, the sort of coherent sense of a sort of resonant society of a people and a tribe and a kind of belonging, kind of blue meme stuff is just not there in
Yeah.
Western Europe and Northern Europe anymore. A little bit where I am now. And when that gradually happened, and we doubled down. Okay, but we've got the individual. We're an individual because we doubled down that. It's individual self-improvement, self-growth, and it can be top down. I'm going to do this, but things were sort of on a nervous system level getting worse and worse. And it
Yeah.
sort of hit some critical mass, maybe around COVID, if we're just going to kind of call it as a sort of time. And then everyone's coming into trainings just tired, like exhausted to their bones. Like
Exhausted.
everyone's burnt out, man. It's not just that one guy in the corporate world, it's everyone. And everyone's
Yeah.
wired. No one can concentrate. I can barely read a book anymore. I was listening to all your stuff on audio because it's hard to read now. And it's like everyone's mind smashed by the tech and no one believes it's getting better. Like, when was the last chance I really, even in like movies and music, and this is maybe me being middle-aged as well, like it doesn't seem original anymore. The
Right.
latest iPhone isn't better than the one from 10 years ago, really. The tech doesn't seem to be getting much better. And when you look out on the streets of the things that really matter, the average British person, it's education, healthcare, cost of living, price of food, price of food's doubled. People go, okay, on all these levels, culturally, economic, things are getting worse. And you think that doubling down on individual self-improvement is going to fucking do it. And
Right.
and I think we realize it won't now. We
It
realize
won't.
it won't, but we're left going, well, what else have we got? That's all we know at this point.
Exactly. This is why I really feel like the distinction of unfoldment is is one of the biggest distinctions that's needed in our times right now. In some sense, we have to go back to what it is to be human. And we've forgotten that. In this technologically attuned world, we see the world in technological terms. We see each other, ourselves in technological terms. And when you do that, what you see is a world that's broken, in need of being fixed, in need of being improved, in need of being upgraded, in need of being optimized, in need of becoming more efficient. That's the world that you see. And it isn't like we can't make some improvements. It's almost like that kind of intermittent reinforcement that's so addictive.
Hmm.
It's like you're at Vegas and you put the money into the slot machines and you're losing money, but every once in a while you win. And it gets you to the point where you're sure the next one is going to be the jackpot. And we're kind of addicted to self-improvement in a way, even though when we really stand back and look at it, most of it doesn't really work.
Most
Most
of
of
my
it is
students literally call themselves course junkies. I'm
course junkies.
long-term sober, so I sort of, raise an eyebrow when I hear junkie about anything. And
Right.
I got sober just after I met you, actually. And they call themselves course junkies, and they joke, and we say like, "Hey, maybe don't rush into another course after." I just closed our coaching course,
Right.
our training for the
Right.
year, and it's like maybe don't rush into another training, and because I don't. Is it going to be that next thing? Because you do get a little bit of improvement, right? You do a meditation course, and you firms up your practice, and you feel a bit calmer or whatever it is. And what gives you hope, Steve?
What gives me hope is that although we've forgotten what it is to be human, that it's actually possible to shift how we attune to the world very, very quickly, almost instantaneously, in a way that we start to experience ourselves and each other in a fundamentally different way. And When we do that and then start to explore that world that we experience, this human world that we experience, um, we find our way back to ourselves. We find our way back to embracing all of what we are. And the way that we work with that shift in Aletheia is from this technologically way of being attuned that I was just talking about into a poetic attunement. And and a poetic attunement is an attunement to wholeness, to innate wholeness. And we do that by loving truth, beauty, and goodness for its own sake. So when I meet with clients, the question I'm sitting in is, well, what's true for you?
Yeah, Aletheia's truth, right? In the deepest.
Aletheia is the
Yeah.
unconcealment of truth, which is why I named it that. And, what's true for you? How do you feel? What are you sensing in your body? What's going on in that relationship, or what's going on in our relationship? And, let's just look at this. And we're not trying to change it. We're working to actually understand it. I think in the technologically attuned kind of self-improvement world, we don't want to focus on what's here now because by default, this isn't it. We want to talk about the future. We want to talk about something else because I don't want to talk about this. I don't want to feel this. I don't want to explore this. This isn't it. That's kind of like the fixed assessment that we're living in. This, whatever it is, this isn't it. So I don't want to talk about it. I want to talk about that because that's what gives me hope. That's what gives me. And the big move here is to say, well, okay, but what is this? What are you experiencing right now? And to actually, even to notice what I'm experiencing right now is I don't want to experience this. Like, can we find a way back into something that's tangible and palpable, something that's embodied, something that's felt, and that shift is possible very quickly. Of course, as we tune into that, we have to do so in a trauma sensitive way, and the world is very, very, very traumatic for many people right now. And so we're having to really become trauma sensitive. We're having to learn to work with the nervous system. We're having to learn to go slow, having to learn to work with the burnout that you talked about. I have people in my classes that get in and in the middle of it, they say, I can't do this. This is too much. And then I talk to them and indeed they're doing two other courses at the same time.
Right.
Um, it's like, okay, yeah, it's too
And there's a
much.
lot more available now with online. It's really interesting that it used
Yeah,
to be I have 20 students a year fly to England to train as embodiment coaches, or drive to the course, and now it's 150 from all over the world. And they're doing Gabor Mate, they're doing something else at the same time, like
right.
that's often the case because they're at home and, there's certain affordability sometimes the courses. As you
That's
say,
exactly what I see too.
yeah, yeah, and it's a lot. It's a lot, and there's always that one more
A
thing.
lot.
And as you say, in the 20 years again since we first met, the trauma sensitivity's massively increased. I remember sort of Stacey Haynes talking about it at Strozy 20
Right.
years ago, but she was ahead of her time. Very
He
good
certainly
teacher.
was.
Respect her very much. And it was like I was just studying with Paul Linden, who was in obscurity in Ohio, doing his thing with trauma. But it's sort of in that time, it's informed coaching massively, mostly I think for the better,
Yeah, I think so too.
also a little bit trauma deformed as well. And I don't know if like you have students who are like, I'm traumatized by that. I mean, you're out on the West Coast, it's
Yeah.
the epicenter of being trauma deformed.
Yeah.
Thoughts
We
on
have a lot
trauma
of people that are
informed?
identifying, over-identified with their trauma. And
Okay, yeah,
yeah.
I've got a student that mentions it almost every time we speak. And
Mm.
she seems pretty functional. She seems like she's in the world, being a mum, doing things. And I'm like, okay, is it where we want to focus all the time? It's this isn't a therapy session. Thoughts on the sort of overdoing of trauma, but bearing in mind, I think we both agree that trauma education is a positive thing.
Yeah, trauma education is positive. It's very necessary, especially in the way that I work, because we're bringing attention to direct experience. And a lot of our trauma responses, how do we disconnect from this? How do we not feel this? And so that's exactly in the way of being able to come back to our humanity and to realize our wholeness. So trauma work is really great, but you're right. A lot of people, have become more trauma aware. And the truth is that we're all traumatized in various ways. And so a lot of people are sort of over-identifying with it, and they sort of walk around with it, carrying that as who they are. And this is, I think, one of the reasons why I love this notion of depth, because when we drop into a particular depth, what we actually realize is that deep in all of us is an untraumatizable self. And it's often in trauma work where we drop into that and we recognize that. And from that untraumatizable self, we can relate to the parts of us that have been wounded, that have been hurt, that have been overwhelmed. And that is really where a lot of trauma release and healing comes from, is realizing that. But that's for many people a pretty radical shift in their identification. And like that's so yes, in trauma work, we need to work through the nervous system to restore self-regulation and co-regulation. That's super important. But I think an even more important one is actually shifting our sense of identity, our sense of who we actually
Mm-hmm.
are, so that we're not identified with that. That doesn't mean the traumatic event didn't happen. You know, we're not trying to be in denial of it, but we are not the sum total of our experiences. We are something fundamentally different than that. We have experiences. We aren't them.
You're right,
And
right.
so we need to sort of make that distinction clearer as a part of that journey.
Yeah, I was doing some big mind type work with some Ukrainian students a few months ago, and
Yeah,
when they sort of spoke from the part of them that hadn't been traumatized and couldn't be traumatized, that was quite profound
I bet.
for some of the students. It's like, whoa, this part of me still exists, and even after 3 years of war, that part of them is there, and it's kind of behind the other stuff, which doesn't take away from the pain and the difficulty of it.
And that's what gives me hope, right? Is that in spite of all the trauma that we can go through, there is an us that is untraumatizable. There isn't us that is whole. There isn't us that is naturally and innately resourceful. Doesn't mean we always know what to do, doesn't mean we always act perfectly, but we can face complexity. I sometimes, the world we live in is highly complex. That's not a problem, actually, because it's actually not solvable. You can't eliminate the complexity of the world, but it turns out human beings, when we're really in full possession of our wholeness, of everything, we're natives in this habitat. We are designed to live and to thrive in the midst of complexity. But we've taken ourselves away from ourselves. We've looked at ourselves technologically in some sense, so much to the point where we're building technology that now mimics what we think a human being actually is. But
Yeah,
is it
yeah.
really?
We're definitely attuned here because I was literally just about to come back to AI as a theme. I've got it written down here. So we're definitely nicely attuned. Um, some of my friends have started doing AI coaching, including quite discerning people doing AI therapy. I know
Yes.
one who does an hour a day because it's free effectively, and
Right?
he has
Right.
issues, and he loves personal growth, and he's like, wow, I can just do this. Doesn't cost that much money. Don't have to wait till next Tuesday when my therapist's available. AI is always there for you, and I'm a skeptic, obviously, as an embodied consciousness kind of guy. But at the same
Yeah.
time, I've been quite impressed with what I've seen. I know some of my sort of more business friends in the coaching world are just worried that it's coming for everyone's jobs, or if not everyone's jobs, a good chunk of the market, right? Like it's
Yeah.
going to be cheap for people.
Yeah.
So, yeah, thoughts on the sort of market side of that and then maybe what's missing from this very clever impersonation of a human.
Yeah. Well, I think that coaching is coming into or excuse me, that AI is coming into the coaching world pretty strong. I think it's coming into the therapy world really strongly as well as in many industries. I'm also been quite impressed in terms of what it can do in certain ways. And I think it will overtake and replace coaches that offer certain kinds of services.
Yes.
Um, the kind of unfoldment coaching that we do, especially dropping into depth and attuning at depth, um, it really requires a kind of human to human contact because what we're dropping into is truly what distinguishes us as human. Is like dropping into strength, into courage, into compassion, into love. And the simulation of love is not love. And that's a distinction that I believe will always exist. And so,
Do
in
you
my
think people will
view,
spot it? I'm just going to jump in, Steve. So,
yeah,
so for example, there was some AIs that were like robot doctors, and
yeah,
elderly people preferred them to the actual doctors, probably because the doctors didn't have very good bedside manner. You didn't have good soft
yeah,
skills. I, I've seen it make people quite narcissistic as well. I knew a guy who was on it hours a day, and he became quite difficult to give any negative feedback to because he just was used to having his ass kissed all day.
Right,
Um, I wonder how good people are at feeling, I mean, real presence, human love from someone that says good question mark. I know how you
right,
feel,
right.
right? Like how
It's,
good at people at making that discernment.
here's the thing, and I picked up on this when ChatGPT came out and I've started playing with it, is that I started to really feel like on the other side of my conversation was a human being. And what I realized is that's the power of the imaginal. And
Right.
so there's a way that we imagine a human being there, and all the AI has to do is not so egregiously violate the magic spell that we're on as to spoil it. And of course, every iteration they're getting better and better and better at that. And so there is a real challenge to that. What's the likelihood that in 5 years we're going to decide that actually interacting with an AI, hours a day is actually worse for your mental health than even interacting on social media for hours a day? And we already know that that's pretty bad for mental health, especially the younger you go, young teenage
Yeah.
girls. Horrible, right?
Terrible, terrible for mental health. Yeah.
So, what's the likelihood that we're going to find a similar conclusion with AI?
Oops, by the way, we've destroyed everyone's minds. So,
I think it's a high likelihood, which, in some sense, really it's interesting. It's like another way of being called back to what is human. Like even our attempts to build something that was human-like kind of missed the mark of humanness. So
mhm.
I'm a champion for the human spirit in some sense. Like I think that there is, and I experienced it in myself, I experienced it in others. There's something here that's very unique about being human that is nourishing. We need human contact. We need community. We need embodiment. Um, and yes, there will be ways that AI can support some of that. Just like there were ways that social media could support some of that. Some human connection was possible there. But we have to learn to work with the technology far more consciously and with far more sensitivity and nuance than I'm seeing currently in the culture. And I think it's a matter of meeting that technology not so much in the technological attunement and ourselves, not so much in the technological attunement, but shifting into an attunement of wholeness. When you can see wholeness, and I speak as a former technologist, I was in software development for 15 years. When you attune to wholeness, you can appreciate the beauty of software, the beauty of code, and what's there, but it's not it's not alive. It's not alive in the way that you and I are.
Mm,
It's
mm.
not whole in the way that you and I are. It's a mechanism. It's an algorithm. And there is it's very sophisticated algorithm these days. But there is a distinction, and we're at risk of sort of losing that distinction. And that's the challenge. I mean, none
Mm.
of us are going to be able to compete with even today's AIs in terms of knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, knowledge has been devalued. We're also about to cross a Rubicon in Ukraine. Within the next few months, there'll be the first human AI death. So currently, both sides are developing, in the last stages of developing drones that are using AI and aren't. There's no human pressing a red button on the other end, which is what happens
Wow.
currently, and that will happen in the next before the end of the year, very likely. And that's a sort of a milestone. So I look forward to fighting the AI drones from the mountains of Slovenia. I think it's good territory for it. But it's interesting times we live in, Steve. Interesting
It
times, and
is.
that humanness is still key. Is still key. Steve, before we wrap up, is there anything you would like to say that you haven't said yet, or maybe just a topic or a kind of something you want to come back to as we move towards close?
I feel like we've landed in a good place here, talking about just the innate value of the human spirit. And I think this is really, finding affordances to open up to who we truly are is, I think, what we're really here for. And yeah, there's a utopian future in which AI takes over our work and we don't have to deal with that. toil, and we can shift into a poetic attunement and live as whatever we want, be creatives, do, whatever. Um, there's no guarantee that's gonna turn out. But what is true today is that we're already here, we're already human, and there are simple ways to start to attune to ourselves and to each other that we can begin to adopt, that begin to open up life, this life, not the future life, but this life, in a way that's more fulfilling. And I feel like we need that instead of incessant, endless self-improvement.
Nice, not incessant, endless self-improvement. Good. We've got a couple of minutes, so I'm going to be self-indulgent before I tell people where to find you. How have I
Sure.
changed in 20 years? You haven't met me in 20 years. So, at the risk of being self-involved and endless self-improvement and all the rest of it, what looks different to you?
That's a good question.
I don't know what the memory is. If it's airing dirty laundry, we can always edit it out.
Well, you're still as witty as you've always been. I can remember that from 20 years ago. I remember you being uh, practicing Aikido a lot,
Uh-huh. I was
and I
obsessed
don't
with
know.
Aikido at the time. I thought that was going to solve all the world's problems. Yeah.
Do you still practice Aikido?
No, I was trying to join a club again in Slovenia, but I couldn't actually get to the dojo nights because I was teaching those nights. Sadly, I'm far busier these days, but I still love various somatic practices. I go to the gym quite a lot and
Yeah,
do a bit of yoga and dance. But yeah, sadly, I was away from Aikido for a while. I'm actually looking to come back to it more as a sort of discipline and exercise than anything else. But I think at that point in my life, I was thinking, yeah, it's kind of full circle with the conversation. We think one modality, this one thing's going to save everyone. This is the key thing, right? Living in dojos, being obsessed with Aikido, and I'm glad I did it. But
yeah, for
you know,
sure.
you know what? You can always text me later. That was enough self-indulgence. So, what are you offering at the moment, Steve? Where do people find your stuff?
So you can find my stuff at integralunfoldment.com, Aletheia Coaching, Aletheia Unfoldment, and yeah, we're launching another level one cohort here in September in about a month. But yeah, I encourage people to reach out.
Steve, real pleasure. Really enjoyed that.
Really enjoyed it as well. Thanks, Mark.